I got Kat Thomas to record a little top of hour ID as well, but I used it last week and he says, get around the Seahawks. So I'm going to replay it, but I'll just reference Kat and then I'll come to you. So when you're on stage, you're on. Okay, get rid of the phone. Awesome, here we go. Thanks, Kat. Look, I did try and call you, Kat, but you're obviously in a gutter somewhere just celebrating the big Seahawks win 24 hours ago. So thank you for recording that. On today's show, we're going to talk about NFL, sports, Super Bowl, radio. This is a sports radio nerd show today. I hope you enjoy it. Dear listener, hello. I don't know if you got swept up in the Super Bowl. I'm not much of an NFL person, but I've got someone on today who absolutely is an NFL person and a radio person and a digital person. And he's going to tell you the story of a very successful switch from one solo AM frequency into a multi-channel sports brand. And we're going to talk about Bad Bunny, and I want to talk about Green Day as well. Let me introduce you to Phil Mackey, who's the head of SKOR North in Minnesota. Hey, Phil.
Wade, we're just going to talk about how my Vikings somehow got screwed in a Super Bowl that they were not involved in yesterday. I'm going to hijack this show, actually.
Hey, well, for the uninitiated, the Minnesota Vikings, what's their record like, Phil, in the NFL?
They're usually highly competitive, but they haven't been to the championship game, the Super Bowl, in now 50 years. They will be, if I could use air quotes, celebrating their 50th anniversary this year of not having played for the championship. Of course, quarterback being the most important position in American football. They had a quarterback last year who was really good, Sam Darnold, who had an expiring contract, and they let him go sign with the Seahawks for nothing in return, and kind of betted that he's not good enough to win a Super Bowl, so we'll let him go. And then the very next season, he wins the Super Bowl with the Seattle Seahawks. So you can tell my level of cope less than 24 hours after that happened.
Well, I'm going to get to that because I've got a theory about sports content that I think works well in your favor. But let's just quickly start. Give us a 20-second wrap on the Super Bowl yesterday. For the uninitiated, I thought it was a bit of a boring game. Was it?
It was a lot of like short yardage gains and punts, and then throw it to $8 million commercials. I think if you were to time out the actual amount of time spent playing football versus watching $8 to $10 million commercials versus watching Bad Bunny or Green Day beforehand, the bells and whistles greatly outpaced the actual game itself. It was kind of a dud game, but it was. I thought everything around it was great. The production, the TV production from NBC. I thought this was the best batch of commercials in maybe 10 years. People always find something to complain about. And then I loved Bad Bunny. I thought Bad Bunny was excellent. It was highly entertaining. It was an ode to America. It was also an ode to immigrants and sort of everything that's happening in our country right now. I feel like he walked a very nice line of providing love and entertainment for everybody involved. So I thought it was a really fun day, Wade.
Okay, good. Yeah, look, fun day, I agree. The whole thing worked as an entertainment spectacle, and the numbers will obviously be huge, so that's not their issue. Hey, I want to talk about numbers. I'm going to give you a number to start with. 1,500 on the AM band. Let's go right back there. What year is it, and what is the problem you're facing with the 1,500 AM frequency in Minneapolis?
The year would have been 2018, and the problem was, if I could just be totally frank, it was really hard to find anyone under the age of about 50 or 55 that wasn't an older white guy that listened to sports radio on the AM dial. And there's a lot to unpack here in terms of the history of the company as well. But the company I work for very well, Hubbard Radio, Hubbard Broadcasting, that goes back to the early 1920s. And AM 1500 in the Twin Cities is their longest running legacy radio station in the company. And I think it was hard to reconcile the fact that long standing, at the time, nearly 100-year-old signal as the centerpiece of a viable business was not going to be a thing moving forward. It wasn't going to be a viable business model for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And so an innovative risk-taking company in Hubbard decided to toss the keys to myself, who had all these ideas about how to spread sports content out across digital channels and reach younger audiences and build a new brand. And so the long story short, and we can dive more into it, is we sat in a room in 2018 and said, what can we do with whatever's left of AM 1500 as a sports radio brand and megaphone and platform, and then the backing of a legacy media company? How can we use whatever inertia or momentum exists in those things to build something new for the next X amount of years, 10, 15, however, because it's hard to predict exactly what consumption platforms are going to look like. But it started off, as we were talking about before we turned the mics on here, and you were also in a lot of those rooms early on too, Wade, where we were literally whiteboarding, what is it conceptually? What do we call it, for one? How do you produce it? How do you tell advertisers what it is? How do you tell the audience what it is? And to see something go from a whiteboard theory back 6 or 7 years ago to an actual successful, profitable, large audience, large scale brand with a lot more upside too, it's really cool to see it come to life.
Yeah, and so let's talk about the content that you had on that original kind of whiteboard, or you tried first. So am I right in thinking that the first kind of content was a sports show podcast that you were hosting?
Yeah, our afternoon drive radio show at the time was Mackey and Judd. And so that was the show that the most people listened to on the radio. It was a general Minnesota sports talk show, which at the time Minnesota sports was very niche. Like you've got sports as a niche, and then Minnesota sports, and usually on radio, and certainly 7 or 8 years ago, Minnesota sports is enough of a niche to draw an audience, unless you're trying to do it on a platform that doesn't connect with younger people. So we kind of assume, well, that'll be our flagship show, and then we'll build other shows, maybe some other general shows. But the first two big concepts were Mackey and Judd carrying over as a podcast, and then Purple Daily as a daily show about the most popular sports team in town, the Minnesota Vikings. And we found pretty early, and there's a period here where we actually started all of this doing live radio, but with kind of a podcast schedule where every show was an hour long or 30 minutes. And we were essentially producing a podcast network through live radio. Pandemic hits. We had to take a couple steps back. We restarted 15 months into this in 2020, just hyper-focused on YouTube and podcast. And what we found during those first 15 months and then the aftermath of the pandemic was the Minnesota Vikings targeted show and then the subsequent other niche shows about the other local sports teams were drawing bigger audiences than the general show, Mackey and Judd. So we found out, to steal a phrase from other smart people in the business, niches get the riches. YouTube, podcast, social media, the more niche you can be, even though you might be reducing the amount of people that would be interested in the content, you're actually cutting through a lot of noise, and you're making more of an impact by being hyper targeted with what you're talking about. That was one of the earliest lessons we learned was, wow, just talking about one subject in an entertaining way actually draws a bigger audience than trying to hit on everything over the course of like 1 or 2 hours.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think one thing I love about SKOR North and what you've done with it is you've followed the audience. You've kind of built a clubhouse, and then what you've done is invited the members in, but the members have kind of voted with their feet, right? Like they're telling you what programs are more interested. And you hit on something with the Vikings there. And I want to just ask you about the difference between creating a sports show for radio versus creating a sports brand around the Vikings. What does it change your thinking in terms of content choices or programs you commission? Like where does your head go when you just focus narrowly on the Vikings?
Yeah, I think in some ways, I actually think that even though you should probably implement different strategies for a live radio platform versus more of an on-demand podcast platform, the similarities are actually pretty closely knit too, in that you want to identify what the most important topics or themes or niches are, and you want to play those hits as much as you can, and maybe cut bait on the things that don't cut through. But I think the difference is with radio, you are plugging into a 24/7 cycle of people flowing in and out of. There's no set starting point on a radio station necessarily for when everyone's going to click play and listen to this thing, and we're going to opt in at, even if we're listening at different times, we're all starting the same thing at the same time. You're programming to try and hit people as they're pinging in and out. And so the more that you can reset topics, the more that you can touch on some different things that might be of interest. When we used to do a 4-hour talk show, we had 16 segments. It would weigh heavily toward Vikings, but we felt an obligation if people weren't Vikings fans or had interest in other things to hit on those other things. And I think the difference is with the podcast world, and you kind of touched on, I think you used the word community. We use the word community a lot. We want to build communities and tribes within each of those niches. We want to be the best Vikings fan community on Purple Daily. And then we want to be the best Timberwolves fan community, the NBA team with Flagrant Howls and so on and so forth. I think it's harder to do that if you have a broad general talk show called Mackey and Judd. You know, like if there was a pie chart of people that are fans of Mackey and Judd in Minnesota, our egos would like to think it's very large, but it's very, very small in comparison to the amount of people that are Minnesota Vikings fans or Minnesota Timberwolves fans. And if we can kind of lead with the equity that those teams have and then build communities around them with fans, that's how you build audiences in a genuine way, where you're just like the center of this. You're the center of this thing that the fans really drive the content for, I guess, is the best way I can put it.
Absolutely. And I'll segue into the numbers now, because I think that I've got a theory about sports content, is that if you're niching down into a team, the best kind of team to have is the one that gives you lots of hope and falls over. Because if they're too good, it's boring. If they're too bad, no one gives a shit. But if you have a team that every season, no matter which code of sport, no matter which location, promises a lot and then drops off and doesn't do well, I think that's awesome for numbers. So talk us through some of your numbers, like YouTube numbers and podcast numbers. How do they stack up?
I have and I'll tell a story about this quickly too when I give you some numbers about the chase that it's the chase and the possibility and the hope that you can finally win a championship, and I have a thing on that. But we sat in those rooms and we were trying to be sales friendly too, of okay, what kind of numbers would we have to produce? Or can we produce radio like numbers, quarter hour like numbers, that we can charge this amount for advertisements in the future? And so there was kind of a math game. You don't just, I think, start producing podcasts without thinking about a goal of, well, let's produce it and try to get to this many downloads or plays per episode. And we sat in a room and said, if we could ever create local sports podcasts that were generating maybe 10,000 downloads or plays per episode, that would be a pipeline or a pipe dream, wild-eyed success. And I remember Purple Daily was the first one that hit an average of 10,000 per episode. And that was probably 2 years in, maybe 2.5 years in. Purple Daily now, which is a 7-day-a-week, 365-day Vikings podcast. Purple Daily averages about 35,000 plays per episode.
Wow.
And the post-game shows after each Vikings game are around 70,000 plays per episode. And that includes YouTube and podcasts, with YouTube now being the biggest consumption platform for us and for the industry for podcasts, which is pretty crazy. We didn't know that would be possible, but
I think what you did correctly is you got the order right. Like, let's find what audiences are into, and then let's give them stuff that they're into. Hey, Phil, we could talk for a long time about this, but it's only a 15-minute show. So I'm just going to ask you one question to finish off with. The name SKOR North, for those of us who aren't in the States, explain it.
Yeah, it's kind of it came from many whiteboard sessions, but ChatGPT could have helped with that in retrospect back in the day. But we wanted to nod to radio and use a word that is commonly used in sports radio. So SKOR, S-C-O-R-E, usually the SKOR in Chicago. There's different examples. We wanted it to sound and look sort of Nordic, thus the K instead of the C. And the Vikings crowd chant is Skol Vikings, S-K-O-L. And it's 4 letters, much like radio call letters. So it's kind of like it's borrowing from Nordic/Vikings. It's a word that is commonly used in sports media, and also it's 4 letters, which is an ode to radio. So it's SKOR, S-K-O-R, North. And at the time, we were trying to think of what's a name that could play on the radio but also make sense on digital platforms. And it's funny, like a year and a half in, we just stopped doing live radio altogether. And so I don't know, maybe if we had no ties to radio, we might have picked a different name. But now I think the personality of the shows and the community has sort of made the name what it is.
Well, it's a great story and a great success story. And I think for the radio and sports nerds or either or listening, I think it's a good example of thinking broader, not just thinking about what you've currently got to work with in terms of your radio frequency, but thinking about multi-platform brands, focusing really on audiences and who they are and what they're really into, and super serving them, and also being able to deliver compelling sports entertainment product. You should check out SKOR North on YouTube. Watch Mackey and Judd, watch some of the shows, Purple Daily, and even if, like me, you have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to NFL, you'll pick up the good vibes and you'll pick up the great content being produced by Phil and his team. Thanks for joining us, Mackey.
Thank you, Wade.
Phil Mackey there from SKOR North. So SKOR North, jump on that. Okay, some quick liner notes to finish us off. The Australian Audio Awards are back. Headline partner is Acast. There's very little time left to get your entries in, and that's for all radio, all audio in Australia. It's commercial, it's public, it's community, it's everyone. If you want to jump on, go to the Australian Audio Awards, just look them up online. A couple of quick shout outs. I do want to say hi to James Cridlin. Thanks for putting us in the Pod News newsletter, James. Appreciate you listening. And also some shout outs. Now, I don't know if Mackey does this. I should have asked him this if he does this on his pod, but I do shout outs to people listening because, I can almost see you. That's how I feel like this community is building. So I want to say hello to Tan, Gene Baxter. Gene Baxter is Bean from LA. Great guy. Now lives in the UK, but very famous in LA radio. He's a listener. Thanks for signing up. Richard Palmer, Dan Condon. We've got lots of people joining us. Darren Cave and Triana Butler. Hey, Triana, thanks for joining us on the quarter hour. Hey, coming up on Thursday, I'm going to talk about benchmarks. Yes, a name that now is synonymous with, oh no, that's the old way. No, it's not. There's one artist in the world right now who's doing a benchmark every time he does a concert. Who is it? Find out on the quarter hour on Thursday. See you then.
Love it.
Hey, thank you, sir.